Welcome to Chemical Safety at Work, the podcast. This week we'll be discussing the challenges of ensuring dangerous goods safety in the workplace with Storemasta consultant Braden Urquhart. Braden, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Pat.
So Braden, can you tell us a little bit about what your job involves?
Sure. So I'm a dangerous goods consultant here at Storemasta. I've been doing it for around 10 years now. So really what my job involves is helping organisations every day throughout Australia and Asia Pacific, helping them reduce their risk around chemical storage and handling and management on site, and really improve their efficiencies as well.
So you've got quite a bit of experience helping find safe and compliant storage solutions and visiting workplaces around Australia. What are some of the key issues that we're seeing in regards to dangerous goods safety issues right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. There's obviously emerging risks all the time around this topic, but really some of the key ones that spring to mind currently are the lack of training on sites throughout the country. So providing that clarity for staff is key.
Yep.
And really understanding the resources that are available out there. So, you know, sometimes we tend to neglect it a bit, put it in the corner because we haven't looked into it too much ourselves. Whereas I think we need to give our staff the opportunity to and provide them and show them where the available resources are. So that's something that's really key at the moment, is being able to provide that level of training to your staff around chemical safety.
Yeah, sure. And what do you think it is that kind of stops that from happening? Do you think it's the complexity of the issues or different levels of the organisation understanding the issues themselves that kind of prevents that training being delivered?
I think it would come down to management knowing what that risk is. So there may be staff that are handling chemicals out in your factory, for example, and do management or their line leaders, whoever it may be, understand those risks that are involved in that. When they do, I think it changes it for them. It really, the whole perspective changes and what they see as risk and what's high risk and maybe what's low risk.
Yep. And lithium-ion battery fire risk must be something that you're seeing a lot of now in your day-to-day?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. That's huge at the moment. As we all know, we see it on the news and the fires that are happening. It's scary. And really that's something that ties in with chemical segregation, I think, in workplaces. You know, have I thought about lithium-ion batteries? Yes, they're an emerging risk. Have I thought about them as dangerous goods? So am I segregating them from flammable liquids? Because technically a battery, being an explosive device sometimes, as we know, if that's stored nearby flammable liquids, it does reach thermal runaway, some explosion happens. Next thing, you've got all your flammable liquids on fire. So really understanding the risks around that and segregation.
There's not necessarily anything in the standards about battery storage and segregation with other chemicals, is there?
Yeah, that's a good point to note. No, not really. There's, I mean, as we know, lithium-ion batteries falls under the Class 9 standard. And then I think sometimes we put it now under, we refer to AS1940, which is a Class 3 standard because of the amount of electrolyte they may be holding on a site within their batteries. For your everyday construction sites, smaller sites that are holding less batteries, it is a key point that you note. Yeah.
So it does really come down to organisations taking a proactive approach to find out how to be safe.
Exactly right. Yep. So it's assessing your level of risk. It's not necessarily ticking the box, so to speak, being compliant, coming up to compliance. It's actually real risks that we're dealing with and fires that are happening.
Are there any other key issues that you're coming across right now?
Yeah, there is actually, and it's the increase in temperature-sensitive substances and dangerous goods out there. So, as we all know, Australia is a hot place. There's other hot places as well, but really going into the detail of your safety data sheets of the chemical that you're storing on site is going to tell you those things. So, the different sections of the safety data sheet, as we know, but even, for example, we had one recently, someone storing large amounts of oxidizing gas. They hadn't realised, but the oxidizing gas needed to be stored within 17 to 27 degrees.
Yep.
And that's key to know those things. So delving into the risks and being able to put measures in place to control them and compliant solutions around that.
So, yeah, in terms of temperature-sensitive chemicals, what are the control measures that you would implement?
Typically, it would be a solution like a temperature-controlled and humidity-controlled environment or store. In terms of a store, that could be a fixed store or a relocatable store, depending on the client's requirements. And we would look at, controlling that environment with a compliant HVAC system. If you're storing flammable liquids and it needs to be in a temperature controlled environment, you need to look at things like your hazardous area rated HVAC system.
Yep.
What does that comprise of? Has it got intrinsically safe electrical? Is it class 1? Those sort of
So there's a lot
factors.
of things to consider when it comes down to putting your solution together.
Exactly, yep.
So as a Storemasta consultant, can you talk us through what happens or what someone would expect the process to be like when they call up looking for a safe and compliant storage solution?
Really, we look at what risks they're trying to manage, and sometimes that's going to open a can of worms. One thing leads to the next. You could have a massive list of risks, or there's just one specific or a couple that you're trying to manage. And then we look at what control measures we can put in place. So really, we take them through the stage of identify the risk, assess it, and that's what we can put in place to control it. And that could be, simple practical things that come up that you could be training your staff to do.
Yep.
Visual things, And then once that's we've identified what we need to put in place, then we look at solutions and the way we execute that solution.
And there's not a one size fits all solution there, is there?
Not really. So every site is different. Every situation is kind of unique. You might have some of the somewhat similar, but every site's different. So and everyone's holding different things.
There's a lot to consider. So you've got the chemicals, obviously, the quantities, the type of facilities that they're in, the amount of space that they have, the combinations of chemicals on site. All of these things will determine what solution you come up with.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess there is similarities across different industries. So, for example, if you run a distillery, you might be similar and obviously hold similar chemicals to other companies similar, like wineries, breweries, things like that.
Yep. But then a school is going to have a different set of requirements again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and colleges, universities, things like that. Yeah.
Yep. Has the industry changed much since you started in your role 10 years ago or so?
It definitely has changed a lot. We've seen, technology's advanced. Let's face it, things are changing every week. There's the introduction of not only new chemicals, but new technologies, I think.
Yep.
And, that's where Storemasta really shines in keeping up with those new technologies and new risks, emerging risks, and then really leading or creating product to control those risks. So
Yep.
we really care about these risks that people are facing.
Often when there's new risks, obviously, then there's usually new regulations that respond to those risks and new technologies or products that are created to help control those risks as well.
Exactly right. So quick shout out to Australasian Institute of Dangerous Goods Consultants. great bunch of people that work every day. They're out in site, they're seeing these risks and really working on, okay, what do we need to update in the Australian standards to meet those new risks that are coming?
Yep. Holding those conversations and driving the conversation and getting feedback from industry.
Exactly.
Have you seen an increase in focus on workplace safety and requirements and regulations over the time that you've been involved from regulators and from companies?
Yes, definitely have. With the introduction of new risks, new chemicals, things like that, there's been an update in standards, for example. They try and update standards as often as they need to help with that. So there's been a change there. And then obviously there is definitely an increased focus, for example, around chemical, for example, with larger companies. Often they're going to have someone, yes, they have people specifically, safety managers, WHS managers, but they have people specifically focused on managing chemical on site.
And not only that, but the regulators are probably setting a higher and higher bar. So you've got more site audits and that sort of thing as well.
Exactly. We don't want to see those audits, things like that, in a negative way.
Yep.
We want to see them in a positive way. It's helping people get home to their families safe every day. If we look at it in that way, I think it will change the whole mindset perspective.
And the risk of an audit shouldn't be the driving force in ensuring safety on site for yourself either. It should really come from within the company.
Yeah. So if we're regularly doing our own internal risk assessments, when it comes to an external audit, we ace it.
Nothing to worry about.
Exactly.
So what do you think the hurdles are to maintaining correct and compliant dangerous goods storage on site?
I think some of the main key issues is, as I said earlier, with maybe some of the management being a little disconnected with the real world of what's actually going on and the level of risk that's actually happening within their workplace around chemical safety. And then probably an understanding as well of what's on their regulations and how to reach minimum compliance.
So what are some of the tools and methods that organisations could adopt to make it simpler for their staff to understand when they're dealing with something like complex regulations? What are some of the tools and methods they can use?
Yeah, so they could bring someone in, for example, someone external that's going to help them understand
Sit down with staff and...
Exactly. Yeah, sit down with their staff, show them what are they handling, and then obviously the risk, and then what they can do in their specific role to maintain not only compliance, but maintain safety. Another thing, like we did with another company, was we implemented a bit of a colour coding method. So you have all your dangerous goods diamonds, and let's face it, often people look at them, oh, it's a dangerous goods diamond. Well, so what? But if you colour code it, and when it comes in, inwards goods, if you have specific areas, so you've got your flammable storage area, you've got your corrosive storage area, actually putting some colours on that so that people come in, that's got that diamond, I'll mark it that colour. That means it goes there.
For sure. I've seen mixed classes of chemicals in a chemical cabinet where the diamond is on the back of a tiny little label and it's not really that clear unless you're really reading it. So it makes it very easy. If those containers are red, they go in the red bay. There's no confusion about it.
Exactly right, yeah. Making it clear, visual, that's key, I think. And then create a bit of an inspection checklist and do your regular inspections that we were speaking of earlier. When you do your own internal risk assessments, when D-Day comes or, the day for an external audit happens, you've got no worries.
So schedule those in and make sure there's someone responsible for making sure that they happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what is chemical segregation and why is it important?
So chemical segregation is separating out incompatible chemicals to stop the or eliminate the risk of explosion, fire, and the risk of incompatible chemicals mixing. There's several ways you can achieve compliant segregation. You want to be doing a risk assessment on it. You want to be looking at your safety data sheet to see what is incompatible and separating that out, and then potentially utilising some safe, compliant storage method. So it could be a storage cabinet that's compliant. Yeah.
There are other means you could take as well that don't necessarily require specific equipment, like just looking to eliminate or substitute a chemical in your processes.
Yeah, potentially. You could substitute something. If it's used in a production facility, obviously that's going to be a bit harder to achieve. But then looking at maybe storing it off-site, you could have someone that stores it for you, for example.
Yeah,
if you've got bulk amounts, that could be something that you look at.
Yep. Yeah, great. What are a couple of examples of chemicals or classes of chemicals that shouldn't be stored together?
Yeah, so a common one that we find is with Class 8 chemicals, you've got your main classes of chemicals, your Class H, Class 3s, 6s, so on. And we realise that they shouldn't be stored together. But then within Class H, you've got, everyone would know your pH scale. So you've got your acids and your bases or your alkalis. And most of the time, acids are incompatible with alkalis. So that's probably one of the most common ones we come across is, are they separated out?
Yep. Yeah. So what is an SDS and what do you consider some of the key sections to help you plan for safe chemical storage on site?
Great question. So an SDS is obviously a safety data sheet. So that's going to tell you all the information about hazards that chemical presents when you have it both in storage, transport and handling of that chemical.
Yep.
Every single chemical that comes into the country must have a safety data sheet.
Yep.
And that is going to tell you all the chemical properties. It's going to tell you the bare minimums of how you need to store that and incompatibilities as well.
And those are required to be stored with the chemical, right?
That's correct. So they need to be stored close by. I think it mentions about it in the standard, close by, on hand at all times, whether that's in a hard copy form or a soft copy.
Yeah, sure. If you were looking into segregation, say, which sections would you jump to first?
If you're looking at segregation, you want to be looking at section 10, which is stability and reactivity. And then section 9 also goes through the physical and chemical properties. Section 10 is with stability and reactivity. Majority of the time, it's going to list out all those chemicals that actually are incompatible with it. So that's a really good place to start when looking at segregation.
So what other sections are important when you're trying to work out storage, for example?
Yeah, so with storage, obviously section 7 goes through the handling and storage information, but often I refer to sections 2 and 14, which sections 2, it runs through what type of hazard or what type of chemical it is, class-wise, subclasses, sub-risks, for example. And then 14 also goes through the transport and what they have to class it as when they transport it, which really helps with how to store it as well, because it relates, obviously, and also helps you with signage and things like that.
Yeah, sure. Were there any others that we missed?
There's a lot of other sections. There's a great article on our website under the resources, under our blog, which goes through all the different sections.
Yeah,
they're important.
So why is the pH level of your acids and your alkalis important?
Obviously, one side of the scale is going to be your acids. The other side is going to be your alkalis. But it's important because when you've got a highly concentrated chemical, for example, if someone's storing something like sulfuric or hydrochloric acid, for example, and it's maybe a 90%, that's highly corrosive, and it's going to be highly corrosive to steel.
Yep.
So when you're looking at that, the storage of that, for example, if you're storing that in a steel cabinet, yes, you can get steel cabinets, compliant steel cabinets for corrosives. However, in a lab situation, they often have highly concentrated acids.
Yep.
And when you're storing those acids in a steel cabinet, yes, they've got things like your shelf liner or whatever it may be, spill trays that is going to help protect the steel. But over time, that steel is going to corrode.
Yep.
We would highly recommend moving towards a polyethylene cabinet. So made out of HDPE, which is high density polyethylene.
Yep.
And there's no steel parts, or shouldn't be, but definitely on a Storemasta product, there's no steel or metal parts that are going to corrode on that product.
Yeah, perfect. Yep. So what would you consider a good site chemical safety wise, what would you love to see when you go to a site visit? What's the ideal site?
That's a great question. It's a bit of a challenging one too. When you drive in, for example, you can almost see straight away in terms of the amount of signage that the site is going to have. So, have they got signage out on the street? Have they got signage on their buildings? And then moving into more detailed, it's probably the segregation. So, have they got compliant storage for the products, whether it's an indoor cabinet or an outdoor store? And then looking at whether it's segregated and updated, like their safety data sheets are updated, they're close by on hand. Yep. Any chemical storage areas have, a safety shower or oil wash within 10 seconds.
Yep.
I think small details like that is really key things that I look for.
Yeah, great.
A great thing to do really is have a map of your site and separate out, if you have a lot of flammable liquids stored or even a small amount, are they separated from places like where people are doing welding or from any ignition sources, whatever that may be? So just have a look at your site as an overall. And that is really where we would look at it as, if we're helping a client, we would look at it in terms of, yes, we need to increase their efficiency, which is key, while reducing their risk.
And so there are specific requirements about distances when you're talking about chemicals and ignition sources as well, aren't there?
Yes, there certainly is. So from any ignition source, it should be 3 metres away to be compliant, any flammable liquid storage. However, sometimes we come across places where we would separate it further than that because of the risk of, it comes down to a little bit of common sense as well. How far sparks are flying, if someone's grinding, for example, they're going to be thrown quite a lot, like longer than 3 metres potentially.
So I want you to give our listeners a little bit of homework. What are 3 things that they could do this week to improve their dangerous goods safety on site?
Okay, 3 things that I would do is have a look at your visuals for a start. So in terms of your signage, for example, on site and where things are kept. Secondly, I would do a bit of a stock take on your chemicals. So write down a list of everything you've got and your quantities and do a bit of a risk assessment around that.
Yep.
And then thirdly, I would have conversations with your staff that are on the floor. So walk down there and have a conversation around, what they do in a day and what their risks are that you can identify.
Yeah, great. Perfect. And if anyone needs any more support or guidance with any of those tasks, there are some great resources on the Storemasta website on our Knowledge Centre. So thanks for joining the Chemical Safety at Work community. We'd love to hear any comments you have about the episode and any concerns that you have about the dangerous goods challenges that you're facing. Our next episode will be on the 4-step risk management methodology that Storemasta employs and that Braden and his consultant colleagues work through. And thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.